And so there'll be lots of opportunity for questions and so forth. Without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Sarah Angood, who is a senior consultant with HR Ladder, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks.
You're very welcome.
And I have a microphone, but usually people don't need a microphone to hear me, so we'll do it for the sake of the recording today. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming out today. I knew the weather might play a factor into people being able to attend, so thank you so much for coming out, and thank you to the Chamber for having us. This is an exciting event for us. We like to do these sorts of things. And we will get to my illustrious panel, but thank you ahead of time for my panelists for being here today. I also need to apologize. So Therese Van Ness, who is the Chief People Leader and founder of Ladder HR, is not able to be here today. Kind of ironic, at about noon yesterday, she came down with a spontaneous cold. And I suggested that maybe today's session, given the topic, is not the one you should be attending. So she's very, very disappointed not to be here and see some familiar faces. So I do send along her regrets today. So we do have what I like to think is an exciting topic to cover off today. And the reason we've chosen this topic is that when we speak with clients, and even friends and colleagues, we find that there seems to be a discomfort and maybe some frustrations when we start talking about how do you manage employees who might have regular or ongoing absences related to, sick, illness. I don't really want to talk about workplace injury, but maybe injuries outside of work. And as soon as we sort of mention the discussion of accommodations, the anxiety level and the frustration just gets heightened and people get very flustered and kind of want to turn a blind eye and run the other way. So we thought, why don't we put together a session that provides our friends here with some empowering information so that you can take back some of that control and know how you can effectively manage sort of a sick employee who tends to be maybe a problem child in your workplace. So that's kind of where we're going today. So I do want to make sure we meet your needs today. And Troy, I'm going to get you to be my scribe, please, sir. So maybe if you could just share with me, what did you hope to get out of today? Just shout it out. You came here for a reason. So what's something you wanted to get out of today? Yes. Perfect. Love it. Yeah, and I have Chris here who is only more than happy to speak to something, to some things that we'll cover off today. Anything else that people were hoping to get out of today when you saw the topic and you thought, what am I going to get out of it? Yeah.
Like what are the trends in right now?
Perfect. Yes. And I believe we have a whole section on that, so hopefully we'll get that covered for you. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes. Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, okay. And I think we'll have bits and pieces, and if we don't fulsomely cover that, we can maybe talk a little bit more about that during the Q&A. So thank you. Anything else? Yes?
Managing injuries like that happen outside of the workplace. And,
yep.
How to
get them back.
Work.
Absolutely, yep, we can cover that. Anything else? I think I heard from most people. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Troy. So we've captured that, so hopefully we can circle back at the end and make sure we've met all your needs there. Okay. Thank you, Troy.
You can read that.
Okay. I can read that. You can read that. You can read that, hopefully. Okay, so I thought it might be helpful just to set some context in terms of what is the terminology we're using today and what is it we're actually talking about when we're using some of these words. So again, I'm not suggesting that you don't already know these things. I just thought it would be good to set some common ground. So there are sort of different types of illnesses and injuries that can occur, and we all have to manage all of those in a workplace. So we can have an acute illness or injury, and that basically means it's something that's happened in the moment, it's immediate, it's occurred right away. It could be short or have long-term consequences. And these are things like, I think we've got up here appendicitis, a broken bone, asthma attacks. They can be acute or chronic. So those are some examples when we say there's been an acute episode or an acute circumstance. That's what we're talking about. We can have chronic conditions or injuries. And those are the things that are sort of long-standing. They may or may not have like an end date. They could be chronically ongoing. And these are some of the more challenging situations we have to manage in the workplace. And those are things like your COPD. It can also be your asthma again. Cancers, mental health is typically a chronic condition. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about chronic. And episodic. So the term episodic has been used sort of in healthcare for about the last 20 years. And it's really that unpredictable nature of someone's illness or injury. So there isn't a set treatment plan that follows a regular schedule that you can predict. And again, some of the things that fall under this category are kind of widespread. So again, it can be things like migraines, cancer, mental health is definitely an episodic condition. So again, I thought it was important just to sort of set the context and the framework for that terminology. Does anyone have questions about the terminology? And she's here! She's going to sneak in the back, but she made it. Okay. All right, so moving on. Okay, so we are an HR firm, and I am an HR professional. I've been in the profession for over 25 years, so it would be very bizarre for me to have a presentation without talking about policies. So truly, if you have good established policies with guidelines and processes laid out, this makes managing employee absenteeism that much easier and clearer for everybody in the process. And luckily, I haven't seen anybody roll their eyes, so that's a good thing. And I'm not talking about pages and pages and pages of policies. If you're a small business, you can have a one-pager that has very succinct, clear information on how you manage short-term absences, long-term absences, injuries at work, not at work. You can have very simple policies, and that just serves as your baseline so that everyone knows what to expect as you go forward. And so just a couple examples here is you can have an attendance policy, you can have a disability management policy. Most small organizations don't have a disability management policy. Does anyone here have one of those? I didn't think so. And I would argue that a lot of our clients don't, and some of them are larger clients because it's the idea of, well, what do I put in a policy, right? There's legalities around it, right? There's concerns about where am I going to overstep? I don't want to put that policy in place, but you can put a very simple and effective policy in place. And again, my bottom line here, and I think Chris would probably support this, document, document, document. Whenever you're dealing with any employee issue, but especially one that relates to sickness, illness, injury, you must have a log of documentation. What happened, conversations that I've had, employee feedback, witness information, colleague feedback. You have to have a log of information to help keep everybody apprised as to where we are in the process, what's happening, and in the unfortunate circumstances, your legal recourse. Chris is probably going to say, so what have we documented? What have we talked about? So once again, my HR hat saying document, document, document. Okay, so the next piece I thought we would go over that may sort of frame this whole conversation nicely is just to review the journey of a sick or injured employee. What that looks like for them, what that looks like for you, and just a couple high-level key elements that you can take away today and start implementing right away in your workplace. And you did notice I didn't mention at the beginning, but I've given everybody a handout with all the slides, so you can sort of take notes as we go along. I'm still a bit old school with paper. Sorry about that. So the first step of the employee journey is the employee takes an extended leave. And when we talk about an extended absence, we're talking about more than 5 days is typically the threshold to consider an extended absence. And what is it that we need to substantiate the employee being off for those 5 days and perhaps beyond? What do we think they need? Thanks, Doris. A doctor's note. Who in the room feels comfortable asking their employees for a doctor's note? Okay. Okay. It's about maybe a third. And those of you who don't feel comfortable, why do you not feel comfortable? Yes. Oh dear. Yeah. Okay. Yes, yeah. So great example. And you did the right thing. So you sought help and then followed the direction you were given. So I can't fault you. I can't fault you for any of that. So thank you for sharing that example, but we will definitely cover that off. So you can ask for medical documentation. You cannot ask or expect a diagnosis. So this is where some terminology is going to come in. You cannot know what that person's ailment, illness, disability is. But what you can ask for is the specific limitations and restrictions that are preventing them from attending work. And that's a really short sentence. Dear treating physician, Ladder HR supports an environment of health and wellness for all employees. Could you please specify the specific limitations and restrictions that is preventing Sarah Angood from being able to attend work? Short and sweet. Okay. Would we feel comfortable with that information? Yeah? Yeah. Did you have a question, Graham?
No.
Okay. Yeah. And again, we could spend hours probably just talking about this little section, but we won't. But again, this is something that you can do right away, right? You can ask for this information because what you're looking for is how can I bring this person back to work, right? What's preventing them from doing their job, right? Something like a broken leg, that's a little more intuitive than someone with perhaps a mental health issue or someone suffering from cancer that hasn't disclosed that yet and are maybe suffering from, side effects from treatment or sleep schedules and things like that. So you're looking for what can't they do, and then you're going to figure out a way to make that work, right? How many people get the doctor's note that reads, Sarah Angood is going to be off? End of. And how many of you go, okay, right? That's okay for the 1 or 2 day illness, right? The flu, the cold, whatever's happening. But if you're talking about an extended absence, how is that information going to help you bring that employee back to work? It's not, is it? They've given you nothing. So as far as you're concerned, this person is totally disabled from doing any work. And a lot of cases, that's not the case, okay? All right, again, I could go on forever with this. Another handy tool that you can use, there is a link here, and I'm happy if you leave your cards behind, I can email all of this out to everyone, I'm happy to do that, is there's a functional abilities form. Is that a familiar term to people? I see yeses and nos. So a functional abilities form is really an extended version of what I've just stated. It's a formalized standard document template that identifies the specific limitations and restrictions that prevent someone from being at work. There's categories that cover off physical abilities, so it talks about your standing, bending, lifting, sitting, your attention, so how long are you sitting at a desk? Are you carrying things? Are you, there's strain, so how long are you working at a computer, typing, repetitive strain. And then there's actually a cognitive section as well. That's now will help cover off any mental health issues. So it talks about concentration, following a schedule, receiving feedback. So this is also a standard form that if you're not comfortable drafting your own letter, you can simply email this or send this to an employee and say, could you please have your physician complete this for me? And physicians are familiar with this form. They may or may not be helpful or skilled at completing the form, but we can cross that bridge another time. And there is actually a section at the bottom of the form that states when the employee is going to be reassessed and when the physician expects them to be able to return to work, and whether that'll be full duties or modified duties. So again, that's another helpful tool, which leads me to actually, yeah, go ahead.
Is this a form that we can use if somebody can't perform like a portion of the role? Like if they say, I can't do that, physically,
Yeah,
then we can use that.
absolutely. Yeah. We may want to do a few more steps in there as well, but yeah, absolutely, because it's a very fulsome document that covers off literally anything you can think about. Yeah. So like, and I would say, and Troy would probably support this, you probably also want to look at a physical demands analysis for the position, which again, there's templates that you can find, which go into a little bit more detail about like how to do the job and those bits and pieces that are involved. But you could sort of attach the PDA, as we call it, with the FAF and send that off. Yeah, okay. So I think I've covered off the ask for what you need piece, okay. So once you go through this process, though, you do have to be prepared to accommodate, right? There's that scary word where people go, oh no, accommodate. And we do have an accommodation question for the panel, so it won't go into too much detail. But when we talk about accommodations, people typically jump to renovating their entire building, replacing their furniture. Accommodations do not have to be that drastic. They can be low cost, they can be simple. Think about a schedule change, right? Think about altering parts of the job that person is doing, right? There are some smaller things we can consider when we accommodate. And there are lots of resources to help you with accommodation, okay? So I don't want you to panic if we get there. Just the one other note that I will mention, because it's a hot spot for me. How many of you have had an employee that has gone on stress leave? Okay, so stress leave isn't a thing. It is not a medical condition. It is not a medical diagnosis. Stress is a symptom of some other issue or problem. So if you get a doctor's note that says so-and-so is off on stress leave, we can ask for more information. And that's where that FAF form will come in, because we need to understand what is preventing them from coming to work. We all have stress in our lives. We all need to know how to manage it, so there's an underlying cause there. So that's just a hot button topic for me. When I hear so-and-so's on stress leave, I'm like, no, they're not. No, they're not. Okay, so moving right along. So the second part of the journey is while that person is off and they're in their treatment, they're recovering, they're doing whatever they need to do to be able to come back to work. This is where sometimes things break down with the employer. How many in this room would think to call an employee while they're off on sick leave just to check in? Oh, yay! Thank you. This is the most important part, and so many people forget this. They think, oh no, the employee is off, like I can't bother them, I can't interrupt them. Yes?
And when you call them and they don't call you back, what then?
That's okay. You've made the attempt. They are under no obligation.
All the time, and they do not answer.
They do not need to call you back because they are off recuperating recovery. It's the effort. Oh, well, this is, okay, that's a different conversation. That's a different conversation. We'll have a different conversation about that. This is, yeah.
Uses are just phenomenal.
Yeah.
That's my cell phone. Whatever, you use your own car to drive to work, and I don't bother you about that. So please answer your emails or your text messages.
Yeah.
Are you coming into work today? Is the question, and they don't answer it.
Okay, and that, yes, they do need to respond to that, but this is when they are actually off on that extended leave. We can have a separate conversation. Sounds like we might need to. This is when they're off on extended leave. So, maybe they're going to be off for 6 weeks. You should be checking in with them, for 6 weeks, maybe every week and a half, right? Maybe every 2 weeks. And it's just to check in. Hey, how you doing? Just want to make sure that you're okay. Are things on track? You're not talking about work. You're not talking about the return to work plan. You're simply just putting it out there that, hey, I'm here. I'm concerned for you. Can't wait to have you back. Hope everything's going well, right? So this is really important. And you're going to set that expectation at the beginning of the conversation, right? So when you're doing all of the documentation and you're getting your FAF form, you're going to let them know that I'm going to give you a call in about a week's time. They don't need to call you back, right? Who knows what else they're dealing with while they're actually dealing with this. It would be, but depending on what they're dealing with, it may be near impossible to pick up that phone and call you back. Yeah, yeah. It would be polite. There would be so many things that would be wonderful if they just could. So the other part of the check-in is that when they're getting close to that, reassessment date or the date you're expecting them back to work, is you're going to want to follow up on documentation, right? So, hey, Sarah, you're supposed to be back to work next week. Could we get some up-to-date documentation so that we know that you're either fit for full duties or if there's some accommodations we need to put in place, right? So you're sending them another FAF form, right? Which you can have 30 of them. I don't care, right? You just want the most up-to-date information. Okay. So then the next part of the journey is the fun part. They're coming back. Yay. So I just mentioned you're going to want to get the dreaded doctor's note, right? What does the doctor have to say? They're fit for work. They need this accommodation. It's going to be a gradual return to work, perhaps. And a return to work plan, is that a scary term for people? No? Okay. Some people find that scary. They think they have to sit down and come up with this master plan that's going to talk about all kinds of things and wonderful expectations. A return to work plan can be very simple, right? It can look like this, right? What's the goal? Well, we want Sarah back to work full-time by February 24th. February 24th? February 29th, because it's a leap year this year, right? There's going to be gradual hours, right? So the first week she's going to work 5 hours a day. The next week she's going to work 6 hours a day. What does that plan look like? And this is all based on the information from the physician, right? This isn't the employee driving this. This is what did the physician provide, right? You may have to modify some of the duties, right? So my example here, if someone has to stand in a production queue, maybe they have to sit, right? So how difficult is it to get a seat versus having someone stand? Not very difficult, right? There's an accommodation that is pretty easy to put in place. Picking and packing orders, right? Weight, you can redistribute, right? The weight of the work depending on the person's needs. We have this one oftentimes where people are delivery drivers, right? So what do? They drive a truck and they can't. Like, what am I supposed to do? There's other work in your organization you can find for them to do, right? I think it's important to note here as well, and I know my panelists have a thing or two to say about this, is, as I mentioned, this information comes from the physician, and it's a collaborative effort between you and the employee. So oftentimes employees will say, well, I can only work Monday to Friday. Well, if you're a 7-day-week operation, what's the difference between a Saturday and a Friday? There isn't. Typically. There's always an exception to the rule, right? And sometimes you may receive a physician that provides you, so-and-so can only work Monday to Friday. That is not the physician's role. They cannot, what's the word, Troy? Work dictation. Thank you, right? The physician isn't in a place to provide work dictation, right? They're there to comment on the employee's limitations and restrictions, their overall abilities to do the job. It's between you and the employee to navigate that. If an employer were to say, well, I can only work Monday to Friday now because I have childcare issues on Saturday, that is a whole different ballgame. Now we're looking at a family accommodation. We're not looking at an illness or wellness accommodation. So this is something important as well, as I find a lot of people get kind of frozen here, right? The employee won't agree to do whatever, right? An accommodation doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to work for both parties, meeting the employee's needs. Okay? And again, we could speak forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever about this, right? All right. Oh, and I've just covered this off. Yeah, so some tips for accommodations. Again, we could spend hours on this, but I thought I'd give you some quick tips. It needs to be meaningful work. So you can't take a VP of sales and have him pushing a broom, right? Like, it's not meaningful work compared to the work that he was doing. And it may not even be necessary meaningful work to the organization. You may actually hire external cleaners. So what is he pushing a broom around doing, right? But he could be receiving AR invoices in the accounting department, right? That's meaningful work. It's meaningful work to the organization, right? He's doing something that contributes, okay? So it needs to be meaningful. It doesn't need to be perfect. I've covered that off. And oftentimes people are like, well, I got to create a brand new job for them. Well, no, start with the job they were doing. What can they do in that job? They may be able to do 80% of it. It may not be the most significant 80%, but if they can do 80% of their original job, start there, right? That's where we're going to start. And then you may need to look at other departments, right? So what's going to fill up the extra 20%? Is there something in another department that they can assist with? Yes?
How do you justify meaningful work?
Sure.
operation.
Yeah.
So they back
If that is meaningful and necessary to your operations, then that is meaningful work.
but some don't think it's beneath them.
It doesn't need to be perfect, and they don't have to be happy with it. And again, then we've got a different discussion, right? Because now they're not cooperating. So now we have lots to talk about. We have lots to talk about, my friend.
Say stuff like that, then somebody grabs that. Next thing they're going and taking that back at me. It's like, whoa, wait a minute here.
Yeah.
Define what meaning is.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I hear ya.
Because when you're talking, it seems like you're talking about a place with 100 employees. I have 10 employees in my place. That's it.
Yeah, so cleaning and hygiene is meaningful and important to your workplace. Yeah, it's all relative to your workplace and your business. Absolutely. Yep. Okay. So I'm going to skip this one. We're going to get back to it. But I would love to jump into our panel discussion now. So I have my fabulous panelists. We have Troy Rosborough, who is it's a very long title, Troy. Manager, Occupational Health and Safety Systems.
Sure.
At LHSC. And we have Sarah Morden, who is an advisor at Selectpath Benefits, just across the parking lot behind us. And Christopher Sinal from Siskinds. So thank you guys for being here today. So I have crafted some questions, and then we'll turn it over to this fabulous group of people to dig deeper and ask their questions. So the first question is, and I think everyone on the panel could answer this, what is the biggest mistake employers make when it comes to managing an employee with an absenteeism due to illness or injury? Who wants to start?
I can start.
You can start, okay.
I don't, can you hear me? Testing. Okay. Yeah, I think a few things come to mind. I think across industry in general, I think there's a natural inclination for leaders in particular, managers, supervisors to rush to judgment when someone presents with illness or injury note. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important in the return to work process and absence management process that we think really objectively about the information first. Because we really don't know what someone is experiencing or what they have going on in their personal lives. And the expectation on employers now more than ever is to be very supportive and accommodating, especially in the landscape of COVID, where workplace wellness is really more critical than ever before. So really thinking from that mindset out of the gate is going to be really important. And as Sarah was alluding to, the next part is ensuring that you have clarity on the information. So if you don't already have disability management policy or procedure, or return to work, or an accommodation policy or procedure, certainly start to look at that, because that is the framework that's going to govern the expectation setting for your employees in regards to their absence and return to work. As you were alluding to earlier, if someone is not cooperating, then you have the policy and procedure to work from to help guide that expectation. Okay, so that's really important. And I think thirdly, just the art of communication is going to be really, really important. You can throw a policy at an employee, you can clarify the limitations and restrictions, you might have safe and suitable work that meets the need, but if you're not really connecting with that person and they don't feel supported, regardless of what you do, they're not going to come back. So you really have to approach the situation with authenticity and genuine concern and empathy, and then balance that out with the objective information. Now you've got the best of both worlds to really support that employee.
Great, thank you, Troy. Sarah?
Awesome. I would echo a lot of that. I think the top things that come to my mind, compassion. I think that is really important, and that's really part of what you were saying, Troy, is remembering that we're humans in all this and having that compassion, and then communication, hands down. That's where I see things go sideways, because I speak to a lot of small, medium-sized business owners that there is genuinely a bit of a fear around, how do I approach this? What do I say? I don't want to say the wrong thing. So feeling empowered to ask the questions, communicate, do the check-ins, even if you're just doing your part, the employee might not be doing their part, but you can't control that. So communication, big one. Policies, huge. We see it all the time on our end as advisors. We get calls saying, what do we do now that this has happened? And it's, if we had a policy in place, it would have been easier, and they don't have to be complicated. On the benefit side, we talk to businesses all the time about leave of absence, like long-term leave of absence policy for your benefits. It can be one page, super simple. So I think that's huge, and I think that helps with the communication, because then you're feeling like you have something to support you. And then I might be a little biased, but the third thing I would say is involve your advisor. We have lots of expertise and resources. Being informed about all of this is really important, but you wear a lot of different hats as business owners. So rely on experts as well in the industry. There's a lot of expertise in insurance carriers, advisors, third-party managers, disability managers. So that would be the other thing I would say.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Chris.
Okay. So before I do that, really quickly, the MOL wasn't lying to you when they said you can't ask for a medical note, but that was just about COVID. There was a special regulation just pertaining to COVID that said you can't ask for medical notes. Otherwise, 100% ask for medical notes. Do all the time. So I think there's two things. The first one echoes what my other panelists have said, which is the importance of communication, active engagement with the employees, treating them with dignity and respect. And at a high level, the reason you're doing that is because there's two risks that really you want to mitigate, right? The first one's your legal risk. Are you actually complying with your obligations under the law? You can never get that risk to zero. You just can't. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what your legal obligations are going to come down to a vice chair of the Human Rights Tribunal, a judge, some third-party person. It's not what's written down. It's going to be an interpretation of what is undue hardship. And no matter how good your lawyer is, I can't control what that person's going to do. So I can never reduce that risk to zero. There's always going to be risk. So the other risk is what I'll call the litigation risk. What's the risk that there actually is a complaint to the Human Rights Tribunal, right? Because if your legal risk's 100%, but your litigation risk is zero, then who cares, right? So you want to try and comply with all of your legal risk, get that risk down. But the real bang for your buck in terms of focusing your energies is in reducing that litigation risk, making that employee feel like they are part of the process, that they understand what's happening and why you're asking for it. So that's the importance of communication and active employee involvement. The second thing, if it's, I hesitate to call it sort of a mistake employers make, but I think it's really, really important, is when an employee's absent from work, reaching out for the medical note to justify the absence, is turning that mindset from, I'm justifying your absence from work, explain to me why you're not here. Although that is legitimate, there is a reasonable expectation that somebody, who has an employment agreement attends to their work. Instead, it is, I need the information necessary to figure out how I can help you do your job and succeed at it, regardless of what's going on. And so like Sarah said, when you get a note, one-liner from a doctor, X can't come to work, what they are telling you is the only possible accommodation that will work for this person right now is not attending at work in any capacity. Well, how often is that the case? Right? And so it's a totally legitimate ask to say, I need more information. I can't build bricks without clay. I need the information necessary to figure out what options I have for you. And so that's the reason for the initial ask. It's not because, jerk didn't show up at work, explain it to me, because that can be a bit hostile. It's talking with the employee about, I just need information from you that you get from your doctor, but you're the one that has the obligation to get it for me, to help me help you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, guys. That was excellent. Okay, our next question is, again, the idea is to sort of arm you with some information that you can take away right away and use. So for our panelists, what are some simple accommodations that an employer can consider that might not immediately come to mind, right? We talked about the idea that when we talk about accommodations, people automatically think, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to spend a lot of money, or I'm going to have to rearrange somebody else's job. So what are some simple things that we can do right off the bat?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think the request for accommodation can span, right, from simple requests to complicated, complex solutions. And so I think it's important to preface this also by saying that, as Sarah mentioned earlier, is it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Whatever the request might be, it just has to meet the medical need, right? So we're looking at this as the basis of medical necessity, not what you prefer, not what you want, but what is medically necessary to meet the need, okay? Because really, by definition, a disability is someone's inability to perform their job. So your role is to really find out what their limitations are to accommodate them so they can do their job as much as reasonably possible. So in that context, I mean, you know, it could be as simple as an ergonomic device. So if someone has an upper extremity impairment, let's say they have carpal tunnel, and they're doing too much wrist flexion, ulnar deviation, and they need a different keyboard, for example, right? That could be a simple accommodation, some sort of industrial tool that they might need because they have some sort of impairment medically. And so by understanding their limitations and restrictions, you can help to support that. It could be an appointment time that they have to attend to. Let's say they're on a treatment plan of some sort. I think generally the expectation is that they attend their appointments around work hours whenever possible, but there might be a conflict that you actually have to support because they can't go around their work hours. So you actually have to think about, okay, how often is this going to occur, right? And can I accommodate this from time to time? Okay, so things like that. And then you get into your more sophisticated traditional accommodations impacting their regular duties, right? So if they have 10 tasks to do, based on their limitations and abilities, they might only be able to do 7 or 8 of them, you know, and you have to absorb some of that, right? Mm-hmm. You want them as functional as possible, again, through understanding what they can and can't do. And something like a job demands description or a physical demands analysis is an excellent tool to have on file so that you can then compare their job requirements, their physical demand requirements, cognitive requirements against their actual abilities and limitations from the physician or specialist. So, and then you have other things like reduced hours, right? So you may, have to have them on temporary modified hours for a period of time. Okay, so those are some of the ones that we see quite often, and
Great.
some interesting ones that are out there.
Yeah, thanks, Troy. Sarah, what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key message really is it doesn't have to be a complete overhaul. There are little things that can be done. I think it's very personalized. I've seen things from, changing the workstation so it's closer to a bathroom, better lighting, noise canceling headphones. I'm trying to think of some of the more unique kind of outside of the box. Coming in a little later, staying a little later, more frequent breaks. So there are a lot of little things that can be done to really support in that accommodation. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a scary thing. It's going at it in exactly the way that you said, Troy, and making it very personalized. I think that's another thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah.
I want to pick that up because the fact that it's personalized is one of the most important things. That's what the Human Rights Tribunal will expect. Because undue hardship, getting to a point where you can't accommodate the person's underlying needs, you need to have done the assessment to figure out what can you actually do for this person. It needs to be a personalized assessment. It's kind of like a high school math test. It doesn't matter if the answer is right. They want to see how you got there and what the process is and the thought process that went into that. So it's fundamentally important. A couple of other things that just came out of this conversation that I do think is important to remember is if you do something like reduced hours, a person is entitled to be compensated for the work that they actually do. So there isn't a legal obligation if somebody's, let's say, working half-time, to pay them fully for the work that they were doing, right? You pay for the work that's actually performed. The employee may not like that, and so that's where you're going to have a talk with them about why this is what we're going to do. And ideally have a plan mapped out for when are the reassessments going to take place? How is this accommodation going to change over time? Which leads me to the third thing, which is that the accommodation that's expected can change depending on how long it's expected to go on for. A temporary accommodation for, let's say, 3 to 6 weeks, the expectations will be very different from a permanent accommodation that you may have to do for the rest of this employee's career. And different analysis go into both of those.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And Chris, thank you for raising the point about pay. I know we often get asked that question, right? So you're telling me I have to pay them 100% and they're only doing, half their job? No, and there are mechanisms in place to help, compensate the employee for that lost time, right? Okay. All right, panelists. Sarah, this one's kind of mostly for you, so we'll start with you, and then if Troy and Chris want to weigh in. But what supports can our brokers and insurance providers give to employers to help them manage employees' sickness and return to work programs? I feel like you're a forgotten source of.
A lot. We can support in a lot of ways. We're not going to do it all, but yes, we can absolutely support. I think your advisor in regards to your benefits should be a part of the conversation, a part of the strategy. I think it's really important, like I said earlier, to be relying on the right partners. I've been in the industry for a while on a variety of different sides, and I don't think all carriers are created equal. I don't think all contracts, disability contracts, if we're talking about disability, are not all created equal. So I think that's really important, finding the right advisor who then is going to work with you to find the right plan design, who's going to work with you to find the right contract and the right insurance carrier. I think especially now, like we're seeing insurance carriers do a lot of different things when it comes to case management. Some are more digital, some are more hands-on. And so really having that discussion up front of what do you want in this relationship, I think is really important. Your advisor is a wealth of knowledge as far as trends and data. You were mentioning trends, Graham. They have a lot of information at their fingertips about your plan specifically. And if you're a small business, sometimes the reporting is a little limited, but we also have access to all sorts of benchmarking and industry data. And I think that's really powerful. Data is powerful. And then you guys sharing back the data with us, what you're seeing, so we can have that strategic conversation. I believe gone are the days that your advisor is just there to say, hey, your premiums have gone up and this is your health and dental maximum. We really should be looking at the big picture and having that strategic conversation. So those are a few of the things. And then the last thing I'd say, because I could go on and on about this, is you can have a wonderful contract and plan and advisor in place, but if you're not doing a good job of communicating and educating around those things, there's a lost opportunity. And I see that all the time. I see some really powerful provisions in contracts and powerful resources that sometimes people aren't even aware that are there.
Very true.
So that's 100% an area that your advisor and to a little bit your insurance carrier can support in, is that communication piece. So
Yeah.
I'll
And
leave it there. But
yeah, and I would say we're seeing a lot of that, and we're kind of pushing that with our clients. Is I'm not a benefits expert. I mean, I can read your book, I can give you ideas, but that education piece is, I know some of our clients have involved their broker largely, in doing education sessions. Like, it's a service they provide, right? We've done a lot of lunch and learns. We've done Zoom sessions. We've recorded it so that people can go back to it and look at it again. Because to Sarah's point, I think there's a lot missed. People are just like, well, like what's the limit? What am I entitled to? Whereas there could be a lot more information in there that people don't know about. So that's just my plug.
Yeah, just to add to that,
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I think, data-driven decision-making in the landscape of wellness and disability is so important. And I think it's really important that you do the analytics to say, what are my employees utilizing in terms of those benefits? And reaching out to them and connecting with them to inquire as to, like, what are their needs? We know with the world today, the needs are ever changing, especially post-COVID, right? So really important that you're sort of keeping up to what do my people need? Where do they need the support? And looking at, I think, additional benefit options for mental health, especially nowadays, and expanding your paramedicals and other supports that can help with that. And again, not staying stagnant, right? Reevaluating and looking at those utilization rates to see where you can best support them, because they are really the engine of the company, right? When they're well and they're healthy and they're at work, everyone benefits from that. So.
Yeah, thanks. Chris, got any comments on that, or?
I don't think so.
Okay, awesome. We've got more for you. It's okay. So one little tidbit, and Sarah, maybe you can just speak like a tiny bit about it, because I had this aha moment the other day. If you're not comfortable reviewing that functional abilities form or that doctor's note, I asked my friend Sarah, would an insurance company provide adjudication services for things like that, so short-term disability, where you don't have a formal short-term disability plan? And the answer is
yeah. And every insurance carrier is different.
different, yeah.
And there's a variety of different things to take into consideration. But we are seeing the popularity of both advice to pay is what some refer to it as, but it's essentially the insurance carriers doing the adjudication. They're looking at the legitimacy of the absence. They can then support with the return to work and the accommodation piece. And so there's that, but there's also disability management programs that are being spoken about a lot more that are supporting on that side too. And it doesn't just have to be disability, like long-term disability. It can be absent management. So there are plans and programs and supports in place where you can have someone be that third party to support. And I think the idea often for smaller businesses is we can't afford that, but it is fairly cost effective if you look at the cost of someone going off long term and that early intervention piece. And so that return on investment can be great. So that's part of the conversation that I would have. But yeah, there's definitely opportunity there.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so what trends are we seeing with benefit plan design that are happening around, and Sarah and Troy, you both kind of mentioned this, but to better support employees with mental health and other chronic illnesses? And I think we can broaden this question too. I know there's a question around like what is happening with corporate wellness. So where are we going with this? I don't know, Troy, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. No, good question again. And corporate wellness and wellness in general. Yeah, it's definitely changing. And I think there are some misconceptions out there about wellness. I think from what I've seen in industry, a lot of companies get caught up in providing elaborate, wellness programs, gym memberships and, just other things that are sort of above and beyond really what's needed. I think when it comes to wellness, it is really about, I think, the simple things. And there's been a lot of research done in terms of burnout and what employees want nowadays. And it's going to sound kind of silly and corny when I talk about this, but it's really about they want to feel valued and heard, right? It's the small moments of recognition. They're called me moments, right? Me moments. And whenever there's an opportunity for you to recognize someone, it might be, it could be privately, it could be more publicly. I would say if you're going to give recognition, it's always best to connect with the person first and how they want to receive that. But it's really just recognizing the work that they're doing and calling out in a way that's going to feel very self-fulfilling, right? Because at the end of the day, most people will leave organizations if they don't feel valued, right? That's what it comes down to. It's not about money all the time. It's about feeling recognized and feeling valued. So I definitely think organizations are trying to get more creative about how to do that, how to look at the recognition piece, probably more and more as part of their overall wellness strategy. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, what are we seeing?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Corporate wellness, I think simplifying things. I think there's this tendency to want to add more and more and more. But what I'm seeing is oftentimes it's like, well, let's sit down and see what you already have access to. Because there are lots of times your insurance carrier might have a wellness program built in that you didn't realize. Your EAP provider, I don't think EAP is dead. I think EAP just needs to be revived. We need to be good at communicating around it. So keeping things simple, assessing what you already have is hugely important. I think realizing that the work demographic is changing. So a trend, a huge theme that we're seeing is flexibility in benefits. So I think that's huge. So flexibility in your core benefit plan, but also what we consider wellness. How can we kind of broaden that definition to be addressing all the different demographics? Because stats are showing now one workplace can have up to 5 different demographics, right? And somebody who's in their 20s has very different needs than someone in their 40s with a large family versus someone maybe at the tail end of their career. So flexibility is a big one that we're seeing just across the board as far as a trend. I think another trend specifically with benefit design is, as Troy mentioned, paramedicals and looking at mental health practitioners. So the paramedical practitioners are like your massage, your dietitian, your physio, and within that is mental health practitioners. A lot of people don't even know that, just there. And what a lot of organizations are looking at is, can we just increase that category, not your massage, not your physio, not all the things, because that will absolutely increase your premiums, but how do we target just that one thing? And we're seeing a lot of organizations look at increasing that to 1,000, 2,000. Again, it seems like a large number, but people don't go to therapy for fun or relaxation. They genuinely need it when they need it. And so that's been a big topic of conversation. Another really simple thing is check out what your definition is for your mental health practitioners. Every carrier is slightly different, and some of them are standardly just including, say, a psychologist or a psychiatrist or just a social worker. You can open up that definition so it includes more, and that very rarely will cost you anything, if not just a very small amount. So there's little things that can be done in that regard. I mentioned EAPs. I think those are hugely important. And flexibility. Those would be kind of the top themes that I'm seeing right now. But it's going to continue to evolve, and I think we have to be open to continuing to listen and let it evolve.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thank you for those points. And I just want to touch on, so Sarah's talking about basically other regulated health professionals. And I think it's also important to know that that doctor's note, it doesn't have to be your family physician. And quite often, people are not being treated by their family physician for whatever illness or ailment they're dealing with. Oftentimes, it'll be a mental health professional of some description. There's also many folks that are seeking what we would call non-standard treatment. So naturopathy is something that someone could be treated on. And you can accept information from those treating practitioners. I think the list is it's exhaustive. It's there's 50 different types of regulated health professionals. As long as they're regulated, it's not Joe in his basement, pretending he knows how to do acupressure, right? But if it comes from a regulated health professional, with their stamp and their number, that is acceptable documentation as well, depending on what the person is doing. Yes?
I've noticed that in a lot of benefit policies, they do specify it has to be a medical doctor, and it can't be a naturopath. Are you saying that trend is changing completely?
How so in the policy? Like the policy stipulates?
Well,
For coverage.
yes.
For coverage, yeah. So I'm talking about the employer adjudicating the note and the information versus your benefit plan. So again, I would work with your advisor on the language that's in your plan. And again, I think that's where Sarah mentioned not all insurance companies or providers are created equal, and there could be different definitions depending on, I'm guessing, underwriting comes into play and all kinds of stuff I don't know about. Yeah.
Change, update almost monthly.
Yep.
You come and tell me something, did you look it up? Because I have a lot of staff come and tell me this and that, I'm going, did you look that up?
You're the employer.
Exactly, so I looked
You're
up,
the employer.
excuse me, that's not what it is. But,
Yeah.
and we have to be looking at constantly ourselves, because I've been hiring and firing for about 40 years. And I had one employee that's in my books for me come and tell me that if we sell something at 50% of that, you still have to charge a GST on the whole amount. I said, what? Prove that to me. She goes looking it up, she finds some American website, I said, whatever. So she goes to her son that works for a larger insurance company, or accounting company. He finds it, yeah. Do you remember Bob Ray? Yeah, he got that in for about 6 months and then they dropped it. So that's what I mean by it's changing constantly.
It is and it isn't. Again, as the employer, you are the employer. So you have a place to put it. It sounds like we have to have a big conversation. We got so much to talk about.
What's his name? We'll write it down.
Yeah, we'll write down on the parking lot. Okay, so I have two more sort of panel questions, and then we can dive into some more fun conversations and questions and answers. Chris, I'm going to start with you on this one because I think you probably have the most to say about this. But what trends are we seeing in litigation that's related to employee absenteeism, and how can our audience avoid timely and costly legal proceedings?
Okay.
This is like an anti-plug for you.
Yeah, no. Well, no, it's so I'm a management side employment lawyer. So all of my clients are businesses, which means that the first conversation I always have with a client is, listen, if we do this human rights case, it'll cost, depending on how complicated it is, 40 to 60 grand. And if you win it, which I can't guarantee, because I can't guarantee outcomes, I'm the worst investment of money in the history of the universe. But if we win it, you still spend 40 to 60 grand. That's gone. Set it on fire. And so if you can resolve it, great. Because if you resolve it for less than that, then I made you 40 or 60 grand. So it's this is sort of the talking about like how do you reduce that litigation risk. I think two things high level are happening with accommodation management generally. The first one is we are seeing far more human rights claims than we did probably 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I think there's a few different reasons for that. From a broad trend perspective, plaintiffs' counsel, plaintiffs' lawyers are now very live to the fact that human rights damages, so when you go to the Human Rights Tribunal and you say this is the thing that happened to me, you'll get two sources of money if you're successful. The first one is you'll get compensated for lost wages that you might otherwise have got. That's all taxable in the normal way. The second type of money you'll get is for what's called general damages for injury to dignity, hurt feelings, and self-respect. Literally written into the Human Rights Code, hurt feelings, black line. That money is tax-free. And so if a lawyer has the opportunity to plead for tax-free damages, they are going to do that because it's worth more to their client. So if there's an opportunity to raise human rights allegations in anything, it's going to be there. Wrongful dismissal case, human rights. Accommodation case, obviously human rights. But so we're seeing a lot more of those human rights claims, and we're seeing a lot more of them in court. Because if you make them in the Human Rights Tribunal, one, there's no cost recovery on either. Everyone just bears their own legal costs. So there's minimal incentive for a plaintiff lawyer to plead there because they'll just get a contingency, but they'll recover no legal fees from the other side. And then the second thing is it takes 3 to 6 years for a case to process through the Human Rights Tribunal right now. So no one does it. Instead, we're seeing them increasingly in court, where there is downside risk if you lose. Right, and so that's one big trend line that we're seeing is just a general uptick in litigation. The other acute reason for the uptick in litigation is, if I can be really blunt, coming out of the last 3-4 years, people are just angry, and we're seeing that in every context. Like we're seeing more arbitrations, we're seeing more civil litigation. Collective bargaining negotiation between unions and employers are mostly going to strike votes where I'd never seen that before. So just generally, that's an acute theme that's going on. I'm not sure that's a broad trend line, though. So that's one of the things. The second thing, and then I'll pass the mic, a trend that we're seeing in litigation, is that when we talk about empowering employees to feel like they are supported and like they're receiving positive affirmation in the workplace. Listen, I'm Gen X. The idea of getting positive affirmation from an authority figure is weird and disconcerting to me. But there's a lot of people that want that. When you combine that with what you were talking about, sir, where people will just go to Google and just type in what they want, there's a disconnect in expectations between, I think, what some people think they should be experiencing at work and what their rights are and what they actually are. And so the problem is when you have that disconnect, if their expectations aren't being met, well, you must be the problem then because you're not meeting that expectation. And so maybe I'll go to the Human Rights Tribunal or I'll call a lawyer and we'll sort of litigate it. And again, the problem is that litigation risk you want to minimize because as soon as it materializes, you just set that money on fire. And so it's increasingly challenging to limit that litigation risk because there's a whole bunch of pressures pushing people to go to litigation.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Sarah, Troy, do you have any comments to follow up with that?
That was great. I learned some things myself. No, I don't have too much to add. I just think generally speaking, it is, not to go down a rabbit hole, but I just find it interesting to consider, like you were saying, people are just generally angrier. People are not as happy at work. People are have higher expectations. Like, again, people are coming in within the hiring process and right away, what do I have access to? What do you do for mental health? What do you do for wellness? How much do you pay? So it's just, things are changing. And I think we need to be open to that. And continue, there's not a black and white answer of, here's what you need to do. But I think we just genuinely need to be open to letting things evolve. And partnering with experts like these guys, because I learned a few things there too. So thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, no, that was great. I think to summarize, the demands on you have never been higher.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you can balance your legal requirements with the ability to connect with people, you're going to do your business really well. And you're right, it is constantly changing. And we see this, in the Occupational Health and Safety Act as well, with our WSIB and, entitlements to track mental stress and chronic mental stress. And it's the way we're going. And I think you're right. It's a different world right now. It's not a happy place, unfortunately. And so you're going to feel the effect of that. So.
Okay. No, yeah, it's across the board. It's unhappy. Okay, which leads me to my unhappy question. But I think everybody's thinking it, and maybe don't know how to ask it. So I'm going to say to the panel, what about COVID? What's happening in our, I'm going to say post-COVID, but we're still in it in so many ways. And I know even as a consultant, it's confusing working with the legislation, the people, the employers, the workplace expectations, the angry people. There is no, and we now don't have whatever the heck that legislation was called, Chris, our roadmap to that whatever, right? Like we don't have those ministry guidelines that are now saying thou shalt mask, thou shalt do this, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. We were given very strict parameters. So without all of that in place, what's going on with COVID, guys?
Yeah, I can kick this off if you want. I think, in my occupational health hat, I think we do have to get a little bit more strategic with things regarding infectious disease, right? This won't be probably the last pandemic, knock on wood. There are other things circulating in the community where you don't want someone coming into work with an infectious disease of some sort, right? Because that then puts you in another risk. So I think, start thinking about tying this into your return to work process, right? Around abilities and limitations. And I do think, though, there is an ability to connect with public health if you haven't done that already, and keeping up to date with the protocols that they still have in place around if someone is symptomatic for COVID, what do you do, right? So still follow, keep up to date with public health guidance as it relates to screening. By show of hands, are you still screening, actively screening at all? No, okay. So you should, I would say not to walk away from that. I think it is still in the community. It's still something you need to do. Otherwise, yeah, so in screening, as it relates to COVID, it's asking your employees the right questions regarding their ability to come to work if they are presenting with symptoms related to COVID. Right, so you don't need to have them do the test, but there are a series of questions that you can ask them to do self-screening. So there is still some merit in doing self-screening to at least mitigate the risk of someone who's maybe symptomatic, but they're not sure if they come back to work or not. And then that's again where you'd go back to the physician note to get that clearance. But I would say it's very, very difficult nowadays to manage absenteeism, especially in the healthcare space, because it's very subjective. There's still so many things circulating out there right now that aren't even COVID that may be contributing to the problem. So don't know if that helps at all, but there was a question back there. I bet.
Can I put you on the spot for a sec? Why didn't you send them home?
I didn't see her.
Okay.
She has her
Okay.
office on the other side of the door. I had no idea. I would have been yelling at her long before that.
Well, maybe not yell, but yeah, maybe not yell, but
Because it was just before Christmas, and I was like.
okay.
So anyway, so she goes home, and my boss says, oh no, I wonder if she'll take out the whole office. There are 12 of us in our office. 10 people ended up COVID.
Yep.
Not me, thank goodness, but I'm vaccinated to the hilt. So,
Yeah.
I mean, whether you agree with it or not, that's just me. I figure
Yeah.
that's what kept me from not, and the controller who has no vaccine. Neither of us got it.
Yeah.
And everybody else in the office was sick. 10 people she took out. I was so angry, and like I said, just before Christmas, so some of these affected their family, affected other
Exactly.
staff that came into the office that day that weren't aware of this.
Yeah.
You know, so we ended up with like we ended up with like 15 people ill because of.
I think that's the perfect example of what
Yeah.
Troy's talking
Yeah.
about, right? Is there's still, if you're symptomatic,
Can we do something about this? I called the labor board
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And they told me that you could send that person, tell that person that they can't go back to work, you can suspend them without pay for as long as you want. After they leave back to the office like that. Because she knowingly knew, she knew she was sick.
Oh yeah, no, you can discipline that person 100%.
Yeah.
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 Enough, 2 weeks later she quit.
Yeah. there's an applause.
Small
there's an applause.
blessings. Small blessings.
One of the things she said to me was, well, you didn't talk to me for 2 weeks. And I said, well, honestly, if I spoke to you, you wouldn't have liked what I said. Like, I was so angry. How
Yeah.
can you be
Yeah.
that disrespectful to your coworkers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Just COVID, even if she had anything, but it was.
Yeah, it's infectious. I love
Yeah.
how Troy framed that. It's infectious diseases, right?
Yeah.
I was so mad, especially she works with, like, I'm old, she works with old people.
Yeah. There's certainly, and thank you for sharing that. There's a lot to unpack there, and kick it over.
Recently, like I said, it wasn't when COVID was at its worst.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I would just say quickly, and kick it over for the panelists as well to comment. Certainly, I think if you don't have a policy yet on COVID or a process regarding COVID, definitely put one into place. Okay, for sure, because that is again going to set the expectations on how your employees are to either come into work or not come into work, and then if they don't follow the process, then there'll be performance management
Yep.
and other things that will follow from that. Right.
Tests available, we have masks, like, I'm still doing all of the same procedures we were doing previously.
Right. Right.
So it was just totally ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like there were grounds for performance management and progressive discipline. I think you brought up a good point about infecting others. I mean, now you have the Ministry of Labor involved. Now you have the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board involved. You've just had an outbreak essentially on your team, and now the operations is not doing good at all. So yeah, lots there. But I think it really comes down to, again, do you have the right framework? Do you have the system that you need to manage these things effectively? And if it's rooted in good policy and good education, good communication, and reinforcement on an annual basis, you'll minimize your risk. And at least if someone doesn't follow that protocol, then when you talk to Chris, he'll be like, okay, you know what, you're in good hands now. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Sarah, do you have any comments on?
I don't have too much to add to that. I think my perspective is probably a little bit different. I'm looking more at the people side of things, right? So one thing, and maybe this is just the mom in me, I'm a mom of 3. I saw how the pandemic impacted the younger generation as well. And I think we're just going to continue to see that come through. I mean, stats are now showing between 18 and 24 years of age, they're utilizing the benefit plan more than ever. They're utilizing the mental health supports more than ever. We know 70% of the spend is in relation to mental health. And so that demographic is just starting to enter, or maybe not quite has entered the workforce. And I think that, to me, that's interesting. I think we need to prepare for that demographic to come into the workforce. And it kind of goes back to what I was talking about around flexibility and benefits, supporting that mental health, not just looking at, what is your dental coverage, what is your massage coverage, but what are we doing in a bigger, more strategic way? How are we looking at your benefit plan as a total compensation package in a very holistic way? So again, that's not really an answer or a solution, but I think that's something we should have on our radar.
Yeah, excellent. Chris?
So I alluded to earlier about the special rules around COVID. So those are gone. And so there aren't necessarily any special legal statutes that apply to COVID anymore. There are WCB considerations, a variety of other things, but one of the problems with the legal system It's the only one. I'm kidding. There's a bunch. But one of the problems is it takes forever for anything to happen. And so for me to say, listen, generally, here's how the courts and the Human Rights Tribunal are handling terminations related to COVID, or how they're handling accommodation of COVID. I can't tell you, because none of those cases have actually processed through yet. And it'll probably be 3, 4, 5 years before we even begin to see anything, because yes, we'll get a case around here's an accommodation, because someone was off with COVID, but one case doesn't do anything. You need to have a whole, an aggregate of them to be able to tell you this is what the tribunal's doing with it. I suspect that where it's going to land is treating COVID similarly to a flu or other, and I'm in no way trying to diminish it, but I think, from a legal perspective, it's probably going to be handled along the same lines. The legal system always also loves analogs because it's easy, right? They can say, oh, this is how we handle this, so we'll just do this the same way. And so broad level, the way to look at that is acute transitory illnesses, colds and flus, are not disabilities for the purposes of the Human Rights Code. And the main reason why the tribunal has done that isn't because they can be very serious. It isn't because they're severe. It's because the tribunal has said if we were to treat these acute transitory things that more than half of the population experiences at any given time, it would diminish and take away from the more significant disabilities that the code actually exists to protect. Now, that doesn't mean, I think, that if you had a reaction to COVID or a particularly severe case, a case couldn't be made to say, I need special accommodation for this. And, again, depends on what a vice chair of the Human Rights Tribunal says. One could probably be convinced to say, in this particular circumstance, accommodation was warranted. But I think where it's likely going to land is if somebody says, I'm off with COVID, I need to be sort of totally away from work. I would say the initial legal framing of that would be less, this is an accommodation situation. I need to figure out whether I can sort of modify your job, and more a sort of health and welfare management situation where, okay, even if I could force this person to come into work, do I really want to do that?
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Yes.
I want to touch on, you said that what do you think the percentage of people that are actually, you can't tell me there's nobody out there that's taking an employer to work or complaining about stuff that is not an illegitimate cause. What is the percentage of those people that are doing that type of thing? Like, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I do. And there's a reason why, Whitten and Lublin, one of the big Toronto employee side law firms, they have a YouTube ad that keeps, maybe it's
Yep.
just on my YouTube thing.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
a guy in like
Yeah,
a black
I'm aware.
suit standing in front of like a
Yep.
shredder that has a Whitten and Lublin thing in it.
Yep.
And he says, I hate Whitten and Lublin because they managed to, succeed with all of my employees' legitimate claims against me. I'm like, why'd you have to point out it was legitimate? Like, what is that? Anyway. Yeah. So here's the thing. I think very, very few human rights claims or civil claims are nakedly fraudulent. I think by far the majority of them, the people behind them genuinely believe
Yes.
that either they have that entitlement or that what happened to them happened because of a violation of the Human Rights Code. They're not right.
No.
But I do believe that they genuinely believe that.
But do you not believe that during the pandemic and everything, that a lot more of those people came out of the woodwork?
Oh, maybe. I mean, we were all going through stuff during the pandemic.
But it only takes one, and
Yeah.
you not only got a staff of 12, it only takes one to take the entire staff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One to take your entire business down.
Yeah.
So I had 3 of
Yeah.
them. The one I let go and the other 2 quit. And they took me to an arbitration. $28,000. And the lawyer took their side. And I was not happy about that. Plus, the person at the labor board, she made a comment that told me she had judged me before she even started the whole thing. She turned around and says, you learned your lesson then, didn't you? I said, pardon me, I'm just asking you a question here. And she said that to me, no more talking to her. Now, did they get anything out of it? No. I got a name on my name, a mark on my The guy lost his job. He tried taking my business and home because he wanted to work from home. He fixes computers. I gotta take the computers over to his house and bring them back to my place? Didn't make any sense. That's one of many things I had with him. I just said, no, you can go. I had enough. Because he was constantly fighting. But he took the other two because he went through my staff, tried to tell him the whole thing all the way through. Now, if you get the wrong person at the labor board that takes their side without being objective about the whole thing, what happens then?
So where I'm going to reframe that a bit, and then I suspect Sarah's got a more general kind of opening the floor idea. But the point that's good, I think, for everybody is that if you get complaints to the Human Rights Tribunal or you get complaints to the Labor Board, both of those pieces of legislation are what we call remedial. They're there to fix a problem. And the problem that they are there to fix is the fact that employers generally weren't nice to their employees. Well, hang on. And so, like the reason the Employment Standards Act contains minimum protections for employees. The Human Rights Code contains minimum protections. And so you should not be surprised when you go in front of one of these adjudicative tribunals to find out that they're not necessarily anti-employer, but they are interested in trying to uphold the protections that are in that legislation. And so whenever there's a choice before them of, do I give the benefit of the doubt to the employee who's saying that they've experienced this, or the employer who's saying they didn't do anything, I'm not saying there's like a legal presumption against the employer, but don't be shocked where you are fighting against that current of decades and decades and decades of conduct that caused that legislation to come into existence.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And again, I think there's plenty we can probably take offline and help you with there. So mindful of the time, and I'm sure maybe people still want to do some networking. So I'll open it up to maybe just a few quick questions for the panel if we want to circle back to our topic. Yes, at the back.
I don't really have a question.
Okay.
I have a comment because Troy said something at the beginning and I really wanted to get up and do the happy dance.
Okay. I was going to say, do I need to protect him now? Or
Better you than me. I don't dance. Sorry.
I was a disability manager for 23 years. So I was the girl that sat at the kitchen table for everything we've talked about. So I dealt with health, I dealt with benefits, I dealt with litigation. And the bottom line is what Troy said. We as employers jump to judgment. And if we could just have a pause, because all of us, including the people that are off, our life shows up at work and our work shows up in our life, and I think COVID really brought that to the surface. And I think those communications and conversations that I used to have at kitchen tables, if those can happen before a DM's involved, it's gonna deepen that relationship. And at the end of the day, like Troy said, we all just wanna be seen and heard and validated, even when we're sick or injured or whatever. So Troy, you did my day.
Wonderful. Thank you for that comment. And what's your name?
Deb Crow.
Thank you. Thanks, Deb. That was very valid. Yeah, very valid. Anyone else have a question for the panel or myself?
I have one question.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure who it would be for, but.
Okay. Just throw it out there.
So if someone, excuse me, says they're sick, as I'm saying,
I'm like, so.
if someone's, or they're wanting you to go home because they're sick, because we have the ability to allow them to work from home, do we have to allow them to work from home? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if you're going home sick or you're homesick and you've got your computer home with you, do we have to? Because if they're working from home, we pay them. If they're not working from home, they have a sick day or a vacation day. So do we have to say, oh, okay, you want to work from home, or do we not have to? Do you know what I'm saying?
So do you guys mind if I jump in on that one? So you don't have to have them. You don't have to let them work from home. They're going home sick. You're sick or you're fit for work. You're sick. You're fit for work. So are you sick or are you fit for work? Right?
During this COVID stuff, and this wasn't
Yep.
the first time. I mean, years ago when it was really bad, of course, we had an outbreak as well. in
Yeah.
other places. But, so anytime someone's at home, if they feel up to it, we usually allow them to work from home if they feel up to it. And I always preface that.
That's right. Yeah.
If you feel up to it, you can work from home. So then most of them are going to say yes because they want to get paid.
Sure.
correct?
Yeah, that's fair.
And we
you're not really gonna work your full 8 hours, you're just not. Well, we're trying to be good employers and good people, and we allow them to work from home and pay them. But if it's someone that you know, like, I guess I'm judging, and I shouldn't be. Like, if you, because you've allowed them to before, you have to always allow them. That's
No.
my point.
No. I mean, you have to apply your logic and decisions consistently and fairly, but based on the circumstances presented. So if someone's going to come to your office and say, like, I am really not well, like, you know, I've got a sore throat, or I runny nose, or my head's killing me, like, I'm going to go home. And then they say, but, you know, I might jump on, you know, this afternoon and answer some emails. It's like, I really think you should probably go home and rest, right? Because they're already in that day of illness, right? So the next day, they may be more symptomatic or less symptomatic. So it's like, you know what, go home, rest for the rest of the day. Because how productive are they going to be by the time they drive home, do whatever they have to do when they get home, and then jump on and answer emails? Like, I would say, like, no, go home, take your rest, check in with me tomorrow. And, you know, tomorrow, maybe they feel like they can do 3 hours of emails, right? And it's like, check in with me and let me know what you got done. Right?
If I could, like, no. One of the things that you've brought up that isn't related necessarily to accommodation management or that sort of thing, but is important, I think, is where we have people that could work from home, or we have a type of workplace where you have the capacity to allow employees to do that. It's increasingly becoming important to put in place some sort of rules or regs around what are the circumstances that people will be allowed to work from home. That could be a policy, could certainly be something in new employment contracts that you have on with new hires that talk about the work location. And the main reason for that is twofold. The first one is you want the expectations to be properly set. You want employees to understand what they're allowed to do and what they're not. Because in the absence of that, what we're increasingly seeing is employees are just taking for granted the fact that they get to choose wherever they work.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, trying to govern that doesn't make you a jerk. It's just appropriate to really set everyone's expectations so they're aligned, because otherwise that's where you get conflict. The other thing is that if you have a written employment contract, please everybody have a written employment contract. But if you have a written employment contract that has a work location clause in it, a lot of them didn't before COVID, because if you only have one work location, why would you bother writing about it? But increasingly, we want to have that to make clear either the expectations that you're going to come into the office, the plant, whatever, or it may say we may allow you to, under certain circumstances, work from home, but you might be expected to sign a different type of agreement that sort of says where you're going to house the computer and all that jazz. But the main point is you want to put in some sort of certainty around that. Because what we haven't seen yet is examples of situations where the employer didn't have any contracts. It's all just sort of woolly and people are making it up. And then we go through 3-4 years of everybody working from home. The question will be, does their employment agreement now allow them to work from home whenever they want? You'd be like, Chris, how is that allowed? Like, what did the judges say? They're not saying anything yet. It's going to take like 3, 4, 5 years before we ever see that. And so being proactive in trying to get those regs and setting those expectations in place is definitely a best practice.
Yeah. Okay, you're welcome. Anybody else? Yes?
Just curious to know your thoughts on navigating conversations regarding PEL days.
Oh, that's good. I haven't actually had to do that in a very long time. So I haven't had to do it in a long time. My most recent discussion around that was just reiterating what they're for. And again, how does that tie into your policies and procedures, right? I find a lot of our clients, their own internal policies and procedures provide I'm going to say, greater rider benefit, right? Like they're already built in to the time off policies, so they're kind of null and void. Is there a problem that you're having around that, or what are?
It seems to be a go-to, like on notification days, or like as if it's another,
Another pot.
Yeah,
Another pot.
Time.
Yeah.
And so it offers up a very awkward discussion. So I was just curious how.
So I think it offers up an awkward discussion if your policies aren't documented and clear. Because if you offer sick, vacation, bereavement, maybe some personal day or something in there, you've met your obligation. I don't know, Chris. Am I saying something contradictory to what you're going to say?
As long as the rules around using those
Yeah.
are as permissive as the
Yeah.
Employment Standards Act, you're okay.
Yeah.
It's
Does
like-
that help? I don't know. Chris,
Like
do you
to
wanna-
piggyback on what Sarah's saying, like a conversation about ESA stat days. Offers actually, it doesn't necessarily need to be awkward because arguably that's an easier conversation because
Yeah.
it's like there are rules. I didn't write them. And so it says like in order for you to qualify, like, you want to use a Pell Day, that's fine. You need to have one of these things. I didn't write it. I didn't make that up. It's right there. I don't have a choice. and you can ask for you can ask for medical note for Pell.
Yep.
Like they, didn't,
Yep.
they took it out for a while and then they put it back in.
Yep.
So you can ask for now. To be clear, the evidence you're not asking for medical note. You're asking for evidence to substantiate the entitlement to the day, right? And so that's different from I need medical evidence around your comment. Totally different analysis. Totally
Very
different sort of request for evidence. It's I meet this criteria for the Pell Day. And so, like, to be clear, again, this isn't a combination analysis.
No.
So you can be like, tell me why you qualify for the Pell Day. Give me some details.
Well,
Yeah.
well, then it's
Yeah.
immediately going to be stress. Like that, I mean, I think that I'm hearing this a lot now, and particularly from younger demographic. Right? Encounter something adverse in the workplace, I either need stress leave,
So that's not a thing.
which I know is not.
My Gen X sensibilities are being triggered right now.
Or well, I'm going to take a personal day.
You can't have both.
You can't, yeah. I'm like, you can't
Yeah,
have,
right.
but you're either ill
Yeah,
or you want to take a vacation day,
right.
right? Like, again, if you have a greater right or benefit to the PEL days, so what is it that you're asking for? And you know what? There are some times where people just need a day off. Okay, great. Here are the mechanisms to do that. We have vacation time. We have sick time if you're actually sick. And again, when we're talking about sick, if someone's taking a day or two, I'm not suggesting or encouraging you to send out an FAF form, right? There could very well be, you have the bad morning with the child and things are going sideways and you just, for whatever reason that you're dealing with, you can't cope. Gonna all kill me now. Take a sick day. Right? Will your employer push back? Will you push back? If it's one day and you don't do this every single week for one day, that's another, right? That's pattern absence. That's something else. Then let somebody take a day. I think everybody in this room agrees sometimes you just need a day. And if you don't abuse that, what we're talking about is kind of, and I hate the word abuser, that's really a little too strong. We're talking about people that have some significant issues, right? It could be health, it could be mental health, it could be physical, right? That's where we've got the issue. So, but again, if people are saying I need a stress day, well, learn to manage your your stress. Therese! Do I know where you're going? Should I say it on the mic? Okay.
This is like Kreskin.
This is like
Many of our clients end up in a situation where they have an employee who they ask for a sick note from because they're a regular user, don't get the sick note, and then they don't know what to do. So it goes on for a week, it goes on for 2 weeks. Now you've got an employee away for 2 weeks. The question that I would have particularly for Chris is, at which point does it make sense to step in with performance management when you're assuming this is a user? And I mean, let's face it, we know our business. We know, right? So this comes up a lot in our practices. I think that's a question for Chris.
Yeah, I think that's a question for you, Chris.
Yeah, so if you say, okay, well, you have a situation where you've asked for medical documentation to substantiate an ongoing absence from work from an employee and they don't respond.
Yep.
Or they do respond, they just don't get it for you. At what point can you come in and performance manage? There is no magic bright line because the answer is whenever a vice chair of the Human Rights Tribunal says you can, which is a frustrating answer, right?
Yeah.
And so instead, the actual answer is when there is enough evidence to make a convincing case that it was the reasonable thing to do in the circumstances. And so that's why oftentimes you'll have, your blood-sucking lawyer will come in and say, have you written a letter that says, here is why I need this information. And if you don't get it for me, it is your obligation to get it for me. If you don't do it, here is what is going to happen to you. And then they still don't, well, that's a way better case, right? Because you can say to the decision maker, we gave them every, and in that letter, if there is a reason why you were unable to respond to me, let me know as soon as you were able, right? And then, of course, if there's no response, you discipline the employee, and then all of a sudden they come back, I was in hospital, that sort of thing. There will be an expectation that you reassess everything, obviously. But really what you want to do is do everything you can so that that individual can be under no illusion that they need to answer you, why they need to answer you, and if they don't, what's going to happen. Because then, again, I can't point you to a piece of legislation that says that's why you have to do that. It's because that's what's going to make a compelling case if you do need to justify it later to His Majesty the King.
It comes back to the process and the documents and the policies, right? If you can document, and again, if you can show that you are a compassionate, kind, considerate employer, no matter how frustrating that feels at times, because I do have to talk a lot of clients off the ledge, you just have to demonstrate that you've done the right thing. And that sometimes is a bit of a litmus test, is if you sit back and go, what's the right thing here, right? It's communication. It's reaching out. Have I done everything I can to support and to get what I need, right? And I think that's kind of been a common theme. So I'm mindful of time. Okay, so I have one more gotcha question, which no one's asked, unbelievably. Has anyone had a difficult conversation with an employee about performance, attitude, I don't know, anything like that, and suddenly they don't show up for work? I don't know. Has anybody had that? Okay. So what do you do? Yeah. What is the right thing to do? So I wouldn't suggest that, but
You're what we call a good client.
at some point in time. So my point to this, and I know Chris would echo my thoughts here, is you don't ignore the performance issue, right? So you're going to follow all of the good processes and best practices we talked about today.
It may take you a year to get through them.
It may take you a year or more to get through them.
Then he's gone.
Then you've got another. Then you're gonna become the best client ever of Siskinds. But yeah, you go through all of the good processes we've talked about today. Hopefully, they provide you with what you need. The flip side of that is when that employee comes back, that performance issue didn't go away. You still need to address it. It may not be the first day that they're back that you're going to beat them over the head with whatever it is you were talking about, but you still are entitled as the employer to performance manage, to make sure that that employee is behaving and performing the way they need to. So that's an important point because that seems to come up a lot. Right? And that's where some of that stress argument comes in. Well, I couldn't handle the conversation. Right. Well, if you couldn't handle the conversation, then are you medically fit to be at work? Right? Like we're grown-ups, right? Like at some point in time, we all have a certain amount of stress and pressure in our life. So that was important that I got that out there today because we get asked that a lot, right? You know, they've gone off on leave now. I had a conversation with them and they didn't come back. It's like, okay, where'd he go? Okay, so before I wrap it up, are there any more questions for our panel?
Did we adjust the parking lot?
I think so, yeah. If I go back to our parking lot, so we've legalities. I don't know, have we covered off enough about our legalities? Okay, I think we've covered off trends, not necessarily in HR, but in terms of wellness in the workplace, best practices. I think we've covered that off. the definition of corporate wellness post-COVID. Again, I think we've talked about it, maybe not in specifics, but we've covered that off. And I think we've covered off managing injuries outside of the workplace, because it would fall in with all of these, right? You fell off your roof doing whatever, that's an injury, right? You need to follow up with how are we going to get you back to work? Does that cover that? Yeah. Yay! We covered off the parking lot. Okay, so once again, I really want to thank my panelists who I all graciously dragged into this. And thank you again to the Chamber for having us out. Yeah.
So I'll just step up to echo those thanks. And Teresa, welcome. Sorry that we didn't get you up at the front here today. But you know, we call this series Ask the Experts, and man, oh man, did we have some great experts here today. And if you want to find a little bit more out about our panelists, it is on our website. There was a description of everybody, where they're from. So Sarah, obviously, Senior Consultant at HR Solutions. Sarah Morden, Right Path Advisor at Selectpath. Chris Sinai, Partner at Siskinds. And Troy Rosborough, Manager Occupational Health and Safety Services at LHSC. All members of the Chamber, I might add, all contributing members, very, very supportive of us. And we can't thank you enough for bringing your expertise to the room. As I said, this is being recorded, so it'll be available to the general public. But I know I learned a lot. I'm sure that you folks learned a lot. Great experts. Thank you.